All right, guys. So say you have many different WordPress installations. You run an agency, you have a portfolio, perhaps you have several different stores, and they all run on different tech stacks. So you've got different plugins, different themes, you got wild. And now you want to bring them over to WPCS so that you can manage them all from a single place. You want to benefit from multi-tenant WordPress, you want to have a limited cloud hosting, and benefit from the versioning system where you can create safe, isolated development environments where you can build out your product, streamline your plugins, hopefully delete a few so that you can use only one for your entire tech stack as you go. But to begin, we want to bring over these wildly different websites into WPCS to start the work. So throughout the course of this video, I'm going to be using a couple of additional software programs. They're recommended, they're not mandatory. And the first one that I'm going to use is LocalWP. So LocalWP is the place where I have my local WordPress installations. And I'm linking a page of LocalWP of how you can import your sites yourself. But in the interest of time, I have done so myself already. So using LocalWP, I'm going to be opening up the site folders of my sites. I'm going to be merging them into a new WordPress installation so that they all have the same plugins, the same themes, and the same language files. This merged WordPress installation is what I'm going to send over to WPCS as a version. And I'm going to use the site shell to use the CLI and connect to WPCS so that I can send over my merged version and my website to WPCS. As you can see, I have 6 right now. But in the interest of time, I'm just going to start with doing 2. And then later on, I will be sending over the other 4 using the versioning system, which is super, super cool because this is where the power of the versioning system really shines. So to start, I just wanted to clarify that these sites that I have are truly different. So we're looking at merging 6. And this one runs on Gutenberg. I have the Neve, I want to say it's called Neve theme and the add-on installed. I've got a couple of plugins and the same goes for merging number 5. So this one runs on Elementor. It has a different theme. So in short, it's totally different. And these 2 websites also look different. And I just wanted to clarify to you that these, are placeholders for your portfolio, for your agency, for whatever you want to do. And all I want to clarify in this webinar is how you can merge all of your sites basically as if it's nothing and bring them over to WPCS. So when you actually start an account on WPCS, this is what you're going to see first. And I've just created an account, and if you don't want to, you don't have to fill in your billing details yet. But we will remind you in the course of your 30-day free trial, and we will delete your account after 30 days only. So in the meantime, feel free to experiment as much as you want. And we will be starting by creating a product. And a product is basically a way for you to keep tabs on your organization. So for example, some of our users use different products to host their portfolio in one product and then their storefront in the other, which is how they automate their onboarding so they can automatically spin up new tenants, new websites, while they're asleep basically. Or say, for example, you build different WAS or SaaS products for your customers, then it makes sense to host them in different products. Or you just want to keep your tech stacks totally separate, that's fine as well. But you don't have to, because I'm going to show you in a minute how you can merge that into a single product. So we have our product called Merged Agency. And as soon as you get there, we actually ask you to create a version. But we're not going to at this moment. We're going to do that using the CLI. So in a minute, we will be creating an API using the API keys. And this is what we're going to be using for the CLI. But before we do so, we first have to merge our sites. So let's create a new site that we're going to name similarly to our product. And this is the site where we're going to merge the functionality of our other 2 sites and our other 6 sites if we get to that. So our new site is now done. and in a minute I'll open up the site folders of the merged agency site and these two and get them together. So let's start by opening up the site folder of merging 5 and opening up the site folder of merging 6. And as this one is done, open up the site folder here as well. All right, cool. So let's go over to the public folder and then enter the WP content folder. And we're going to start with merging 5. Same goes for here. Open up the WP content. And then what we're going to do is we're going to copy the contents of the language folder. And in this case, as you could see, the merged agency does not have a language folder yet. So I just copied it from here. Open up the plugins folder, copy everything that's inside, open up the plugins folder and copy everything that's inside. And I want to replace, keep, skip the index.php, doesn't really matter. This one is basically the same. Entering the themes folder, copying the entire contents, opening up the themes folder here, pasting that in, and again, keeping, replacing, skipping the one step we already have. So this one is now pasted into the merged agency WordPress installation. Going to merged number 6, and again, please remember to only copy the contents of the folders that you want to merge. So right now I am going to, as you can see, I now have them here. Opening up the plugins folder, opening up the plugins folder, copying all of that. And so again, some of the sites are, some of the plugins are similar, so I'm just going to replace those because I just want the plugins. I want them all in here. And in this case, just to show you that it's possible, these are already present in this WordPress installation. Opening up here, you can see that that's the case. So I'm just pasting in the Neve theme. All right, cool. So my merged agency now contains all the functionality of these two sites combined. Opening up the site folder once more and going back to the console, we're now ready to create our API key. So the API is going to be called CLI because that's what I'm going to be using it for. And it gives me an API key and an API secret. All right. So going back to the site folder, and this is where we're going to start using our second software program, the additional one. And this one is called Visual Code. And Visual Code is a very neat program that allows me to open up the site folder here. And I want to open up the public folder. And so I want to actually have the folder open that also contains the WP config. So now I know I'm in the right folder. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file. And this file I'm going to call .wpcs. Hold on. .wpcs-cli.env. And in it, I'm pasting this, which you can also find in the recipe of this video. All right, so as you can see from this corner right here, I'm hosting my product currently in EU1. We have the choice at the time of this recording of 2 data centers, which is in Europe or in the US. So I'm taking out this part, specifying that I want to use the EU1 region. And so then I go over to my API key, copy, going back to Visual Code and replacing this bit. Going back to the console, copying the secret and replacing this bit. So now in my agency merged WordPress installation, I have everything that I need to connect to the API of the product that I have. So I can get rid of Visual Code. I can go back to my WordPress installation. Just want to get the overview so that we can see what's happening right away. Going back to local, open the site shell. And the site shell will allow us to connect to the CLI. When we have opened up the site shell, we're going to be using the following command and then end with check. I always like to check if everything is still correct, and it has. So just pressing up on your keyboard, you can have the last command. And in this case, I want to say local deploy because I'm deploying this immediately as a version to WPCS. And I haven't specified the name, and it will tell me that I haven't. So I want to say V1. I always like to name my versions progressively because you're always iterating progressively on your product. Starting with V1, version 1, version 2, version 3. Feel like you're gaining something, right? You're building something and things are going well. So there we go. We are now building a version in WPCS that contains all the functionality that we need in order to push over our other two sites to WPCS as tenants. So I'm going to pause the video very quickly just so that I can install the same .env files on merging 5 and merging 6. You don't need to see that again. All right, so I just finished inserting the .env file into merging number 5 and merging number 6. So it now has the same file that contains the API credentials of my product so that I can send it over to WPCS using the CLI. And this time we don't want to send it over to a version, we want to house it in the same version. So we want our tenants to live inside of that version so that I can unify my management, right? So opening up the site shell, just as before, I'm going to start with similar commands and then turning it into a tenant instead of a version. So checking if everything is checked and everything checks out. And so instead of using local deploy, I'm going to say local package because this time I want my local WordPress installation to turn into a snapshot that I can then send over to WPCS as a tenant. And so what it has done right now is it has given me a path and I've copied it, pressing up just as before. I'm now telling the terminal to create a tenant, and this one I'm going to call merged 6 site, and now sending over using the custom snapshot path. And please take note of the caps and looking if everything is typed out correctly. I am now sending over this site to WPCS. There we go. It has now sent over, and as you can see below here, merged 6 site has started to happen. So closing over this terminal, opening up merging 5, again going to the site shell, enlarging this, starting with npx at wpcs.io/CLI/check or space check, and it's good. So again, we're going for local package. And as I mentioned, this is going to deliver me a path that I'm going to copy because that's the custom snapshot path that I'm going to use to create a tenant. So copying, using the command tenant create, giving it a name, merged 5 site, and then custom snapshot with a capital path is, and there we are. And so now we are creating our second site. So sweet. And we now have 2 different sites that are being created, and as you can see, they both live in the same version. So while we're waiting for our site 5 to appear, to launch, I'm just gonna go over to the version and actually check that this does contain, as you can see, all of the plugins that we want to have for both our sites, right? So seeing that that's there already gives me the confidence that these two sites, which are functionally different, are going to be able to live inside of WPCS. And going over to those two sites, we can see that they are actually in use, loving it. And so now I can have my sites here, I'm hosting them here, they're infinitely scalable, I can manage them from a single version. Moreover, I can actually turn this site into a snapshot that I can use to start spinning up new sites as I go along. So what I've done right now, I've actually shown you that you can merge your completely different sites into a single version in WPCS, move over your sites using the CLI to live in a single version. From here on out, you can actually streamline your product. You can start deleting plugins that you don't need. You can use one plugin for both categories of sites. You can create snapshots of your sites to use as template to sell more sites. You can automate this process, which we're going to be talking about as well. And this is basically the place where you, over time, start turning your WordPress portfolio into an actual SaaS product. You streamline your processes, you use fewer plugins for more sites, and this process does not get any more complex however much you grow. So whether you have 2 sites, 20 or 200, this is the same process, and we make sure that you stay scalable along the way. So hope that helped you out, and make sure to follow along with this process. All right, so we talked about bringing over your sites to WPCS. And you can either do this using the all-in-one migration tool, which is a plugin that we found works well with migrating over sites, but we mostly recommend using the CLI because the CLI enables you to merge your sites into a single version. You know, you can simply copy over the themes folders, the plugins folders, and the language folders into a separate WordPress installation. We use local WP to do that. And then using the CLI, you send that over to WPCS as a version. And as soon as you've created that version that contains all the functionality for all your sites, you can again use the CLI to send over, or you can use all-in-one migration because at that point you already have your version that contains all your functionality. So however you want to do it, this is the point where you can actually start sending over your individual sites to WPCS as tenants. And what you end up with is your website portfolio in the dashboard where you can manage all your plugins, all your themes from a single version. So however much you grow, you only have to update a plugin once. Whatever you want to do, you have individually scalable, separate WordPress installations that have a separate database but a shared functionality. And that's cool. That's super cool. That's super unique. But what if you actually wanted to automate the process of selling new websites? While you're asleep, you could be selling new websites and then wake up and notice that you have an additional 10 websites that are all built from these templates that you have created and then saved as snapshots. So how are we going to do that? In order to do that, we need a storefront. Well, fortunately, WPCS provides you with one. So let's start by creating a new product. I like to keep my storefront and my agency or my portfolio or my SaaS separate. You don't have to. We have many customers that actually sell storefronts as their product. So as such, it does make sense to have your storefront and your actually client websites in the same product. But in this particular case, we are handling the use case of an actual agency that you've merged onto WPCS. So it doesn't really make sense to have your storefront in the same product because you might use different plugins, you might use different versions, you may even have a different team working on it. So if that's the case, I recommend you to use a different product. So what we're going to be doing right now is similar to building out your product as you're building out your portfolio and merging your sites, which is start by creating a version. And as I mentioned in most of my webinars, I like to name my versions progressively. But the only difference today is we're going to be using the storefront snapshot. So if you so happen to want to host your storefront elsewhere, feel free. You can download the all-in-one migration export in the recipe. But if you want to benefit from the versioning system, the API, the CLI, and the multi-tenant cloud hosting, you're going to want to host your storefront on WPCS. And for this, we provide you with a snapshot. And this snapshot already contains the plugins that we're going to use to leverage the multi-tenancy, leverage the API for WPCS. All right, so there we are. Our version is done, and this works just like every other product in WPCS, which means that we're going to be creating a tenant where we'll build out our storefront. So that's what we're doing right now. We're creating a tenant, and just as any other product in WPCS, you can leverage the versioning system to continuously build on your product, continuously install new plugins, new themes, update your product in new versions, while at the same time hosting your storefront in your V1 version. So this is how you can keep leveraging the power of multi-tenancy in your storefront, even though you only have one tenant, because in this particular case, you just want to leverage it for your storefront. So we're going to go over to the WP admin, and I'm going to show you the two plugins that we're going to use in order to leverage our API. And those are WooCommerce, Automator, and we already have a product installed. And what's good to know about the product is we have what's called a product ID. And this is going to return in just a second. And we've just so happened to name it WordPress SaaS. You can name it anything you want. As you're using the base snapshot, make sure that you remember the product ID. All right. So we have WooCommerce, that's already installed and configured, and we have Automator, and for Automator, we're using different recipes in order to trigger our API. So going over to this recipe, you can see that we have a so-called product that it triggers, and here you can see the product ID. It has a name that you can change, obviously, and then we have the webhooks. And these are the webhooks, or this is the webhook that we're going to be using and adapting. All right, so in order to get the API that we want to use to trigger new sites, we're going to go back to our merged agency product and then open up the API keys. And in this case, we're going to create an API for our storefront. So this is the API, this is the API key. And in order to use that for our recipe, we're going to go over to this website that I have listed in the recipe as well. And we need to make sure that this is set to encode. All right, so in order to use this automation, we're going to copy the API key, get it in here, and notice that I used this thing here to separate the two. And so now we're going to encode, and this is going to render us this thing, and then we're going to go back here and then paste that here and keep the space here in between. That's it. And then we're going to add a pair and call that group name. And please notice the capital. And here we're going to select product ID because we want it to trigger the product ID here. All right, cool. And then finally, remember how this product ID is 33? When we go back, obviously we want one of these two sites as our templates. So I like this site. This is a cool site. This is the thing I want to sell to my customers, right? So going to the tenant overview, I'm going to create a snapshot of this and going to call it the ecology template. And normally this is where I make comments about the plugins that I've used, the themes that I've used, and the group name is 33 because that's the product ID that I want to spin up, right? And it's based on merged 5. So as this is being created, as soon as this snapshot is done, and you can find it, I maybe went a little too quick here. So from the version overview, you go to view all snapshots, and then you have your so-called version snapshots. So these are the snapshots that you make from your version. And as soon as you make that snapshot, it will influence the functionality of all the tenants in the version. Then you've got your tenant snapshots, which is the one I'm creating right now with the group name 33, which is the same as the product that I'm selling. And then finally, you have your custom snapshots, which are the snapshots that we've created from the CLI and send over to WPCS. And as soon as this is ready, we are ready to start leveraging our storefront and instantly and automatically selling our tenants to our customers. All right, cool. Our tenant snapshot is done. So that means that we can go back to our storefront. And so obviously this is not designed. It's just to show you how the storefront works. So in this particular case, I'm going to purchase this product. And at this point, we only have one, but you can make as many as you want, replicate the process. All you need to do is make sure that you have the product ID and that when you create a tenant snapshot from the WPCS console, you give it the group name with the same product ID as the product that you're selling. So we're going to go check out and fill in my details real quick, and we're ready to sell. There we go. Our order has been received. We have now automatically sold a new website in WPCS, leveraging the storefront. And as you can see, Roger has just purchased a new website. It's being created. It has the tenant snapshot that's based on merged site 5 that we've just brought into WPCS. So what we've done is we've actually started to automatically resell our portfolio that we've just imported into WPCS. We have completely separate templates that work on different tech stacks, and still we can manage them from a single version and sell them automatically in our storefront. All right, guys, so we've talked about merging your two WordPress installations inside of a new WordPress installation in local WP, and we've uploaded that onto WPCS as a version. And then afterwards, we have taken our existing WordPress installations that are the templates that you're going to want to use, or those are the production sites of your customers that you're going to want to push, and we push those using the CLI to WPCS as tenants. And now we want to continue that process, right? So say, for example, in this video, we now have a couple of sites that are used by our customers and they are living in the version that we have created. And I want to keep uploading new sites that should be merged inside of the same version. And the last thing I want to do is do that in the version that already contains these sites. Because as we've explained, anytime I change something in the version editor and deploy a snapshot, the changes will instantly be sent over to the sites that live inside of it. I don't want that. I want to keep those safe. I want to keep those separate. What I do want is to have a clone of my version that does not contain any of the sites, where I can develop my product, and then whenever I create a snapshot, it doesn't accidentally overwrite or create an error in any of the customers, in any of the sites, in any of the staging environments that I have at that point, right? I want to keep that safe, I want to keep that isolated, and I want to progressively build on my product. So from within the console, what we could do is we could go over back to actions and create a new version. And like I said, I always want to name them progressively to really emphasize the fact that I'm iterating on my product. So if I did this manually over here, I could also choose the version of WordPress and the version of PHP. And then finally, I can base it on the version and the snapshot that I want to use. So in this case, I would use my latest snapshot, which is the tenant snapshot that we created to trigger a template in the storefront. And this is how I could clone my version and create this isolated environment. However, I want to go back to local WP in this instance and keep merging the functionality of my new site, because that's going to represent another tech stack, and then push that over using the CLI again. Right? So even though we could manually create a new site, a new version, and then install the plugins and install the themes from within the WP admin, I want to go back to local WP and keep merging the functionality from within the site folders. And to do this, I have another website, merging to. It's right here. See, merging to. This is another site that I want to keep merging inside of the version. And going back to local WP, I'm going to go to site folder, open this up. All right, so you've seen this trick. I'm going to go to the site folder of my merged agency and open that up as well. And repeating the same trick, I'm going to copy the language folder, the plugin folder, and the theme folder from my merging to, from my new site, onto the merged agency WordPress installation. And then I'm going to push that as a new version to WPCS. So this new version will then contain the functionality of all these 3 sites, but it will be in an isolated, separate version. All right, let's do that really quickly. All right, guys, I'm back, and I just copied over the plugin, theme, and language folder of merging number 2 into merged agency. And so it now contains the functionality of my first 2 WordPress installations, but also the functionality of merging 2. So now I'm ready to start moving this over as a new version into WPCS. And to do so, I'm going to open up the site shell just as we did before. Just before I get too quick here, let me enlarge this as well for you guys. And just like before, we're going to run the command CLI check just to see if everything checks out, and it does. And so now I have a new fun command for you guys. That is that I'm going to check if I'm in the right product. And I do so by getting the list of tenants that I already have. And this is exactly the list of tenants that I have. So now that I've confirmed that I'm in the right product, I am going to do a local deploy. Writing and talking is always hard for me, and I did not specify the name. So there we go. As I mentioned, name them progressively to really emphasize that you're iterating on your product, which is exactly what we've done, obviously. So therefore we call it V2. So we're in the right product. We are going to create a local deploy, and this local deploy is a new version that contains the functionality of 3 different websites. So after this version has been created, we can push the new tenant to WPCS. And let's go over to the console and have a look. And we are now currently creating version number 2. So as I mentioned, version number 2 contains no tenants, right? So opposed to version number 1, this one has 4. This is where I store my production sites. This is, the safe place, as you could say. And then V2 is my experimental place. This is my development environment. And also, as this is a new version, this is also the place where I'm going to send my new tenant, right? So after I've confirmed that V2 works, I'm going to send over my new tenant over to V2, and then slowly and deliberately moving over my other sites to V2 to see if everything still works. And say, for example, that it doesn't, I can always move it back to V1, fix whatever's wrong, and then move it back to V2. And this is how I maintain this safe and continuous development cycle. So every time I want to change something about my product, about all the sites that I want to build, I create a new version. This is where I make my changes. So in this particular case, I have merged new functionality inside of my new version so that I can upload a new product that has different technical specifications onto WPCS, but always doing that in a safe way so that my existing production sites are not going to be accidentally overwritten, are not somehow going to be missing functionality because I messed up something. In local WP, I have this safe place. So V2 is ready, and I'm going to go back to merging 2, and I need to install the API credentials so that I can set this over to WPCS also. So I'll be back in a minute. All right, guys, so you've seen me perform this trick before. What I've done is I've pasted in the API credentials. In this particular case, I've copied them from the merged agency installation and put them in merging number 2. So I'm saving this file. And I am now ready to open up the site shell of merging 2 and send that over as a tenant to my new version number 2. So going over the commands one more time, at wpcs.io/CLI check, and it checks out. And let me just get the tenant list just to see if I'm in the right product, and I see that I am. So now, as before, when we were sending over the WordPress installations as tenants, we need to make sure that this becomes a snapshot. So for this, we perform the command local package, and this will give us a path, which I'm copying right now. And then I just realized that I should enlarge this file for you to see. All right, so because from now on, we are going to do some new stuff. Not yet though. First, we're using the command tenant create, giving it the name. So I'm going to say this is called merged to agency, and then dash dash custom snapshot path is the path that I just copied. And then here's the new command, which is dash dash version ID. Please note the capital I is because I want to make sure that this tenant is created in my new version, correct? So I have my new version right here, going over to the version overview, and inside the URL you have, after the last bit, I am copying the version ID, which is right here, and then going back to the terminal, pasting that at the end, pressing enter, and now we are creating our tenant from the WordPress installation in local WP, and we need to make sure that this is created in the new version because this is now my development environment. And as you'll see, it has created a new tenant. So going back over to my tenant overview, as you can see, and I actually mistyped the name of the tenant, but fortunately it is for a webinar, so it doesn't really matter how I call this tenant. So you can see here, it has been created based on a custom snapshot. We already have our URL, and it is currently living inside of version number 2. And we can see this also in our version overview. So again, still our V1 is our production version. This is to make sure that whatever automation we have set in our storefront creates tenants in our V1 version, because this is the place where I want to have my production sites. This is the place where I want my customers to have their site. And then in this video, we've created a new version. This is a clone of the V1, including the plugins, themes, and language files of our new site. And we're going to see if that actually is the case. So in this particular case, the Cubely Advanced Gutenberg blocks is one of the plugins that is very specific to the tenant that we've just imported. So I'm making sure that this is the case. And again, and I've mentioned this before, the plugins that you install in your version do not have to be activated in order for your newly imported or your newly created tenants to be able to use them. So going over once again to our merging local, just to make sure that everything is going to look the way I need it to look. It's the same site. See? So right now we have 3 different sites with different tech stacks imported into WPCS, and they all live in the same version. So all of our sites will actually have the same plugins installed, but each of them has different plugins activated and configured. And you'll see this in a moment when I navigate over to the plugin overview. You see it has a lot of plugins, but only few of them are actually activated. So whenever I do something inside of my version, I install a new plugin, I update a plugin, and I press deploy, and I actually have tenants inside, these changes will instantly be sent over to my new sites. All right, so going back to this specific example, I now have a new tenant in V2, and I want to consolidate my other sites as well. So I have my merged 5 site, I'm selecting it, and suddenly a new button appears, and it allows me to move over this site to my new version. So it's really up to you how you want to approach this. You can either move over your sites one by one and see if they still work, or you can just select all of them and move them over to the new version. And if they just so happen to not work, you can always quickly move them back to V1, enter them, see what's wrong, fix it, and then move it back to V2. And the overall idea obviously is to make sure that all of your sites are always living in the same version so that you can build them in a unified manner and update them in a unified manner as well. So let's go over to merged 5. It still works. All right, so that's good news. Let's take the other one. Let's take merge 6 then. And also this one, we are moving over to V2. And obviously I can do this for days. Like say, for example, I have 100 sites. Obviously, I'm not going to move them over one by one. I'll most likely move them over all of them at the same time and then see which ones don't work. For example, by using a software that actually checks the health and the status of my sites. And then the ones that don't work, quickly move them back over to V1 and make sure that they are fixed before moving them back over to V2. All right, so after that had been done, so say for example, you now have moved over all of your tenants to V2, you go over to V2 and you set that as production. So setting it as production makes sure that your new customers, whenever they make a purchase in your storefront, will have their site created in your V2, which is going to be the site that houses all of your sites, right? And this one also works. All right, so I hope this example makes it very clear that you can use WPCS as a platform where you can build out your product in a unified manner. This product contains several versions, and these versions contain your tenants, and it all pushes down to below. So basically, whatever you do in your version will affect whatever needs to be done in your tenants. And using the versioning system, you can create an isolated environment where you can upgrade and update your product. In this example, in merging another site and then moving over your existing sites into the new version, making sure that you end up with a SaaS-like portfolio where you manage all of your sites from a single source. All right, thank you for watching this webinar, and I hope to see you on the platform soon. If ever you need any help, please reach out to us. We're eager to make you successful on the platform. Thanks, bye.